Everyone. Before I start, can everybody hear me and see me? I'm functioning as I should be. Perfect.
Yes, you
So,
are.
just move on. So, I'm Ollie. Hello, nice to meet you all. As Gavin said, I am a grad of illustration from Norwich from 2016. 2013 was when I actually started the course. So, I feel very old speaking to people who haven't yet been to university now. It's quite a long time ago, nearly 10 years. Wow, that scared me saying that out loud. Um, so I am a award-winning conceptual illustrator slash bionic man, which I'll explain shortly, based in Manchester in the UK. And I translate science, health, and tech into vivid human stories. So this little potato on screen is me, if it's not obvious already. And around this point, I was around three, just after. And we didn't know this at this point, but at this point, it was discovered that I was born with a congenital heart condition, which means basically it was formed in the womb. And it's essentially, it's called heart block, and it's essentially my heart doesn't beat at the speed it should. So, as a treatment to that, I'm powered by a battery called a pacemaker. So, this is a real scan of my chest, an X-ray. And I basically have a battery here in my chest, which is wired into my heart, into the ventricles, and it can constantly send electrical impulses to my heart to help it beat at a healthy rhythm and kind of gives me a quality of life that I wouldn't have without it. Um, so essentially, science, health, and tech govern my life in a way that is kind of subconscious and something that I didn't really take into consideration until when I started to fully explore it at university. So, just a snapshot of what that means. This is kind of a pacemaker on the right, which is again a real thing that I have. I couldn't find it unfortunately to show you today, but it exists somewhere. And I'm, have an ID card, which means that if I go to an airport or something, I can't go through the scanners and instead get quite violently frisked, which is entertaining. But yeah, Bionic Man, Iron Man, as some people like to call me. And it is just my normal. I don't know any different. I don't know life without this inside of me. So I've always been reliant on science, health, and tech to survive. So where did all of this come from? Or kind of where did I become an illustrator, I guess? So um I studied art in kind of GCSE level and kind of gained a real interest in it just from who I am and that I've always liked to draw. I used to draw cartoons on the TV when I was a kid, and that led to me having, I guess, that kind of fascination with how we visualize the world around us and how different voices can help that conversation. And I think I was trying to when Gavin and Eddie and the team asked me to kind of think about this, I was thinking about like what was my fascination with visualization and like the world, and I think it was exactly that. It's like I knew I had like a different angle on things that is a unique voice that other people don't have. And illustration is the perfect tool to do that. But at this point, I didn't even know what illustration was. So I went on to what is called a foundation course, which I know Norwich also offer as well. They call it a year zero, I believe. And it's essentially like a diagnostic course that allows you to try different disciplines across the whole creative industry. So in my one, I didn't do it at Norwich, but I did it at a local college at the time where I was living. And it was like we did a month in graphic design, a month in fashion, a month in textiles, a month in fine art, a month in sculpture. So across the 12 months of the year that I did it for, I got basically experience in tasting all of these different disciplines that helped me understand what type of creative I was, what really I was passionate about, and then ultimately what I'd apply to university to go and study. So it was at that point where illustration was introduced to me, and I was actually kind of taught what it is, and it isn't just drawing. So, with that in mind, I would just like to show you some kind of early university work that I did to kind of solidify that journey that I had. So, this at the time when I did it, and I can't confirm, Gavin and Eddie will definitely be able to confirm, but at the time when I did it, nearly 10 years ago now, The illustration course at Norwich was set up where in your second year you did a similar type of foundation setup where it was you did a module in fiction, so things that aren't real. So very much driven by narrative and storytelling. And this, what you're seeing on screen at the moment, was kind of an experimental response to a story called The Circular Ruins, which is kind of about awakenings and perception and kind of a bit surreal. And then you do a module on fact, which is about things that do exist and real life. So this was kind of a reportage, as we call it, which is essentially like visual journalism, I guess. So I probably illegally, if we were to do it these days, broke into kind of like a building site in Norwich that was like an ex-working man's club that was being knocked down essentially. Definitely wasn't supposed to be there, but I was kind of looking at like what was happening, why it was happening, listening to conversations, sketching on the job, or on location, should I say, and just kind of a really like hands-on approach to drawing in the moment, rather than kind of this kind of super finessed, um, in your own time version of visualizing the world. And then they asked you to pick one, so fact or fiction. I picked fact, and kind of this is where I then started to delve into my condition and how I can help other people understand what it is and what it's doing to my body, and how I can kind of contribute to that conversation. So these are what they call cyanotype prints, which is using sunlight on special paper. And these are my fists. And the idea was is that your heart is roughly two fists size, and it beats in like a that kind of motion. So these are just very early explorations of kind of how to visualize a heartbeat in a non kind of cliched way. Um, yeah, it's quite an interesting prospect. This led on to my final major project, which is what you're seeing on screen, called Battery Operated. And I essentially made, it's quite weird, so bear with me, but it was essentially like an experience that I built, based around like operating on yourself, essentially, feeling these sensations of like a bionic man that I am, that are really hard to verbalize, hence why this project existed in the first place. So, like the weight feeling in your chest. The thing you're listening to on the recording is kind of like modulated sounds of a heartbeat and kind of this bionic influence on it. And I spoke to lots of people on forums and things who are also pacemaker patients with different viewpoints and kind of opinions on what is a thing and what isn't a thing. And very interesting for me as a patient too, to kind of get that outside perspective. So yeah, that was kind of where my degree led to. Did really well, and really loved the project, but it started to feel a bit insular and a bit inward, and like you felt, I felt a bit like I maybe went a bit too far into this and didn't really consider like what my skill set would be outside of this. So I'll speak about it shortly, but that's kind of where my career is now led. So after university, I kind of quickly realized that freelance illustration is something that takes a lot of time, momentum, energy, money to kind of actually get off the ground. Um, I will not lie to you and say it's an easy journey. It absolutely is not. It's very difficult, and that's part of the reason why I'm heavily involved in the emerging talent scene now in the UK, is to kind of help that journey for a lot of people, and using my experience and my professional insights to actually get something um, to across to these emerging talents that I didn't know at the point that they're at, to kind of help them into industry effectively. But before all of that, I actually worked in advertising. So this is an agency that work in the healthcare and pharmaceutical space here in Manchester. Obviously, being a patient and interested in health and how it's communicated, I got a place on their graduate program, which is essentially, if you think of it like an apprenticeship, I was paid on the job to kind of be an active member of their team involved in art direction, design, and creative concept design, and really exciting things. But I was paid to do it. I was paid a salary to do it at the same time on like a junior level. So they trained me effectively to be an art director. Worked on some really fascinating jobs while I was there. A couple you're seeing on screen now. So the left one is HIV awareness campaign. So HIV used to be a death sentence. I'm sure many of you have heard about HIV and AIDS. really kind of devastating illness with no cure. But there is a treatment these days now that you can take if you're diagnosed with HIV that allows the viral load, as they call it, in your bloodstream to get to such a low level that if you were to have sex with another person or to kind of be in a situation that would normally put you at risk of transmitting the virus to somebody else, it's impossible. It can't be transmitted because the virus level is so low, which is amazing. It means that these people living with HIV can live in their authentic ways and do what they want without the fear of infecting somebody else, which is, incredible. Proof that medicine is kind of just amazing. Um, on the right-hand side is a psoriasis help journal. So psoriasis is like I guess like a chronic skin condition, again, with no cure. It's quite often driven by the immune system, which means basically that there is no cause. It's your own body doing it to itself because it's confused. And it's terribly debilitating for everyone who has it, especially the severe cases, because it can affect your self-confidence and your mental health as well as your physical health. And it's kind of this journal is like a self-help book for the people who have the condition to kind of keep track of symptoms, manage their journeys with it. And it's kind of everything from photography to illustration to typography to kind of just creative ways of them seeing their journey. So these are the types of projects that happen in kind of the real world in advertising and how my experience as an illustration graduate helped be on a team of creative people, whether it be a copywriter, an art director, creative director, an art worker, all these things that you may have heard of and don't really know what they do, but they're like a network of people that come together to create these types of projects. And I was one of them. So I did that for 4 years, and kind of quickly realized that illustration is very much like I want to say like a nice to have, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but it's not a kind of cure-all solution like design is. Every client on earth will always need design because there's always a need for design. Illustration is not always the right creative solution to a brief, and therefore I very quickly realized that if I want to be an illustrator, there is no daytime job for an illustrator. That's the harsh reality. It does not exist. You're a freelancer always and always will be. So that's why it is so difficult because you don't have those 24/7 day-to-day need for an illustrator. Um, but it is possible. I'm living proof of it. So at present, I do something like this. So this is a cross section of my current work. And although I'm not talking about pacemakers anymore and I'm not involved in kind of advertising healthcare campaigns as such, I'm still mediating with the work that I do. And I guess what I mean by that is I'm building bridges between complex topics to help people understand them. So I'm doing things across neuroscience and psychology, medicine, AI and technology. It's quite a focused area of science, health, and tech, given who I am and what I'm interested in. But I very much still have a broad scope of what I work on. It's not kind of the same subjects all the time, which is the beauty of being an illustrator. You quite often learn on the job as well. Thank you for the compliments. Very nice. So this is a bit of an insight into what you guys will be being asked to do today, but here's something I'm becoming, well, I would argue I am quite well known for, which is covers. So my work is very bold, both in tone and color, and it's usually quite a good solution for a magazine cover. So I think I kind of have this experience now where I can prove I can do it, which helps a lot. And I always say to people, if you don't have the experience, almost fool people into believing that you do. So I'll speak about it a little bit later on, but spec work, as we call it in industry, which is essentially taking something that exists already, like one of these covers I've done, and taking the headline and using it for your own brief, is a really perfect way of doing that. And that is exactly what I'm going to ask you to do today in this workshop. So here's a selection of the people I've worked for, kind of non-exhaustive list, but um, yes, I've been around the block a little bit, I should say. And I'm also represented by Making Pictures out of London. So that has helped massively in my career as well in terms of having that agent on my side who can help me market myself in places that I'm interested in and kind of gain those conversations to hopefully lead to jobs. So I thought it'd be interesting and very useful for you to just see an overview of kind of where my process comes from and what I do. Because when I say to people I'm a conceptual illustrator, that can sound quite confusing, and it's not a term that you come across very often, especially given that you've not yet been in this kind of higher education system. So, as a little icebreaker activity, I just wanted to throw the word illustration on screen. Um, it's quite a loaded word, I feel, and it's quite a word that a lot of people don't understand. So I'm in no way judging you and I'm in no way pressurizing you, but if you feel comfortable enough, or if you want to just kind of have a guess at what you feel like illustration is or means to you, um, put it in the chat and we'll kind of keep that in mind as we're going through this conversation and we'll see where we get. So I'll give you 2 minutes now just to tell me what you think illustration is. And there's no right or wrong answer. I just want what's in your head right now when you see that word illustration on screen.
So if you pop your thoughts in the chats, on the Zoom chats, already seen some coming in. Brilliant.
Interesting. Sorry, I'm just reading your responses.
Like how visualization or visual seems to be the key word
And
for
storytelling
this.
as well, which is yes, but not necessarily as like storybook, children's book illustration as everyone kind of latches onto with the word illustration. That's one aspect of it. So I think we'll go on to it now. If you've got any more thoughts, keep continuing to put them in the chat. That's fine. I just don't want to take up too much time. But the word itself, if you didn't know, actually comes from the Latin to illuminate. So, illuminate in Latin is illustrare. So, I'm sure you can tell that's where the word itself comes from. So, if you take the linguistics of the word and where it comes from, the word illuminate means to make something visible, make it bright, shine a light on it, see beneath the surface, a different side to it. Or it can also mean to clarify something or explain something. And that's why you can kind of class like scientific diagrams dissecting the brain or something as illustration because it has a purpose, it has a function. I think the difference between art and illustration is art is very inward. It's about people like buying into your vision, essentially, and it's like your way or it's wrong. Um, and illustration is very much about an outward projection. So it's about problem solving. It's about responding to a brief. It's about letting somebody into something as a gateway that they wouldn't otherwise have the access to. So all of what you said kind of incorporates that in a way, but that's kind of a very basic definition of what illustration is or should be because it's a word that a lot of people don't understand, as I mentioned, even people who I've worked with in advertising, because they've never studied it and they've never been around it in the way that I have. They've always seen it as just kind of like a visual to accompany something, but there's a lot more to it than that. And that is something that I really want you to keep in mind during this workshop today. So, my process. So, I quite often get quite complex briefs, as I think is quite obvious based on the type of work I do. Quite often it's from scientists, editors, people with PhDs, and I don't necessarily understand it to the degree that they do. So, quite a lot of the time that I'm working on a professional brief will be me interrogating the problem or what is the problem. And it's arguably the most interesting side of my job because that is where I learn new things. Um, it is where I kind of see what different viewpoint I have and what the client can't do, and therefore what value am I bringing to this brief. Then obviously I guess you'd call it the fun part. But it's also the most difficult part, in my opinion, going away and actually thinking of, well, how to communicate a solution to this problem. What does that look like? Um, it's not always, as you'll see, first solution is the one that the client will buy, or the one that I prefer the client will buy. It's very much like you've got to understand you're a service to a business, and although it's yes, they've asked to work with you, and yes, they like what you do. Ultimately, it's their thing you're illustrating, it's their brief, it's their problem, and it's their business that's going to put out the work. So it's a compromise sometimes about like, well, I think this is the best creative solution, but they prefer this aspect of the other one. So it's like, well, how can we join them together potentially? Um, then I'll put them into a presentation deck similar to what you're seeing today. I might even hop on a call and actually talk through the ideas, just to show them, this is my perspective on the matter and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think it's a really underused skill that if you can do it earlier rather than later and actually practice these skills of like putting your thinking into a deck so that if someone was to see it that has never seen it before, they understand it to the same way that you do. That's a really useful skill as an illustrator to have that I would highly recommend you practice. And obviously, then you have a final product when the magic happens. So, as an example, this is a real brief that I did, and I will show you the outcome very shortly. So this was for the British Heart Foundation, which, for those of you who aren't aware what they do, they are a UK-based charity who are fighting cardiovascular disease and funding the research that's going into making heart disease in general more manageable and ultimately less cases of it worldwide, but especially in the UK. And they have a publication that goes out to all of their members and the kind of health staff and people in that kind of community. Um, and it's called Heart Matters. And this was for a science article in there about the new research that's emerged about um, new treatments that can lead to kind of treatments for heart conditions, but it's based on people's circadian rhythm. That is basically a really fancy way of saying the body clock. So we've all heard of the body clock, or hopefully you have, where people naturally fall asleep at certain times or naturally wake up at certain times. I'm sure you've kind of wanted to lie in, but then your body's woke you up like 5 hours beforehand, and it's really annoying. But that's called your circadian rhythm, and it's very much to do with kind of light exposure and production of a hormone called melatonin, which makes you sleepy. So the basic principle of that is that the less light your eyes are exposed to, the more melatonin is produced, and therefore the more sleepy you feel, and that's why it's recommended that you sleep in a dark room, etc. So this is kind of a snapshot of the early stages of what I'm going to get you to do today. But what I like to do and what I think is kind of just a really basic way of interrogating the brief to start off with is understanding what it is it's actually asking you to do. So if you think about just the phrase getting to the heart of the body clock, there's a lot in that that you can start to pick apart just as kind of what it is, forgetting the creativity for a moment, just what is that thing that you're talking about. So, two key themes that I picked out were this idea of a circadian rhythm. So you can talk about kind of rhythm and beats and patterns. It could be a drum, then you can kind of think about the heart and the way that it beats. The pendulum, because it's about kind of this rhythm and motion and this kind of like pattern that people are in. Time is obviously a massive part of that too. Sun and moon, which drives the days. Paces, light and dark, as I mentioned. And then you can also think about sleep. So obviously you think about sleep and nighttime. Then you can go kind of like outside of that and think about dreams and otherworldly. And then you have the metaphors of like sheep jumping over fences and um, then you can think about the moon again, and then you can start to kind of see connections between these things that otherwise aren't necessarily visible. Um, does that make sense before I go on? Does that kind of make sense in terms of like what I'm doing here and what I'm trying to achieve by doing the lists and things? Yeah, cool, great. So that's always my step one. That's always, I've received a brief. This is the headline. I'm going to note down some things which I can start to kind of pick visuals from. And keep it very simple at this stage. You're just thinking of what objects, things can be associated with what I've been asked to do here. So I then go on to stage two, which is kind of creating little thumbnails and getting kind of a feel for what these objects could look like. And the goal here is not perfection. As you can obviously tell, these are awful, rough, sketchy, scrappy drawings. But on the left-hand side here with the little boxes, my goal is just playing with composition, scale, joining things together that feel like they don't belong together, like an eye and a moon, but it works. And playing around with how I can communicate this idea of rhythm in function to a day and a heart if necessary. Um, so keeping it very simple, keeping it very basic. We're not in any way going highbrow with kind of materials I'm using. Um, I'm very much just playing around with basic ideas. Um, you'll see that I've like put ticks and things next to like ideas I think are working, and I then translate them into, I guess, more of a fully fledged rough, we'd call it. So still quite basic, excuse me, in terms of what I'm actually showing the client. It's in no way like the final image would look, but it's just an indication of this is what I'm thinking are the best ideas. And I may not have actually ever show them this on the left-hand side. This might just be for me only to process my thinking. And then I'll show them these kind of more fledged roughs. But I think it's just helpful for them to understand where my thinkings come from as well sometimes. But I'll end up with usually I aim for about three. Um, what I would call final roughs that then give the client choice. And I think that's the most important thing you're trying to achieve here is not dictating to a client. Because in this instance, if you want to call me your client, I'm going to be your client in the sense that you're trying to onboard me onto your vision, but ultimately I pick which one I feel is right. That's the reality of working as an illustrator. You will never ever have final say unless it's something that you're doing for your own portfolio. Because, like I said, you're a service, you're offering a service to another business and you're answering their problem. So it's ultimately their decision. Um, but it is a collaboration too, and they do respect the expertise that you bring that they don't have, hence why you're involved in the first place. So I land on these kind of final sketches here, which is where we'll land at the end of this workshop today, kind of and have like these feel like they're working. These are two, three, four, if you can have them, ideas that feel like they're really good. I've started to play around with the idea of light and dark here as well to get that circadian rhythm aspect in. I'm not sure if my cursor is visible on share screen, but if you can, this bottom left one here, the heart bed. So kind of manipulating a heart anatomically to look like a duvet in a bed. That's one that they bought, and that's the one that they liked. Um, so again, just the harsh realities of a job. I thought I'd just include this because, yes, the British Heart Foundation are quite a specific type of client and not necessarily like everyone would work for them. But this is also the realities of being an illustrator, where you'll get medical feedback from medical experts who said, oh, this doesn't look quite right, or we need to do this white vessel in the same aspect of this. And it can get quite complex very quickly. So, again, my job as an illustrator is a mediator, it's a bridge builder. And I can't just ignore this. I have to take this on board because the people who are seeing it are ultimately going to pot out that, this is an error that the business has made if I don't fix it for them. So, um, again, just some insight, and it's nothing to do with what you've been asked to do today, because I'm not going to go to town on your on your ideas like this at all. But again, just some insight into what an illustrator's job can look like, and it's important that you're aware of that, just so that you understand that feedback is part of the job. This was the final result. So this was an extra challenge. It's a branded job. So this kind of very potent red and this kind of plum color and I think the purples as well. A long time ago I did this, so I can't remember. Um, this was the BHF brand palette that I was asked to use, which I'm not going to ask you to use a brand palette today because it's just another level of complexity that complicates things. But um, again, these are just the realities of when you're asked to do a job professionally that there are obstacles sometimes that take you out of your comfort zone. Like, I don't think I've ever used red in any of my work unless it's for the BHF. I don't enjoy the color. I find it quite difficult to use. It's quite potent. It looks quite angry to me. Um, but it's needed in this case because it's the business's brand color. You can't avoid it. You either do the job and accept that or you don't do it. So, again, just some harsh realities of what sometimes compromise can look like when you're a professional illustrator. But I do like this. I think it's a successful outcome and it's quite tonally, it's quite a soft play on that headline. I think some of the other ideas could feel quite harsh visually and quite scary if you are someone who did have a heart disease of some kind and reading this as an article. It could be quite scary maybe, but this feels quite mellow, I guess, and approachable, which again is part of my job as being the illustrator. So, what am I going to ask you to do? So, you've seen all of that, you've seen what I do, you've seen kind of how I approach the brief and kind of how I recommend approaching a brief, and you're essentially going to do the same thing. So, I'm aware you've not seen this yet, so I'll leave it on screen for you to kind of just digest what it is. But I'm going to ask you to make a magazine cover or ideas for a magazine cover, should I say, sorry. And it's going to be on this headline, Facing Up to Microplastics for the Institution of Engineering and Technology. Typo there, apologies. Um, so microplastics hopefully is not like a foreign word to you and you've kind of heard it in the media and the news and it's a hot topic in the science community at the moment. And this was a real job that I did and it's kind of scientists don't have any kind of conclusive proof yet that microplastics are harming us, but they have enough red flags to be concerned about it. And they found microplastics, which are essentially non-visible microscopic parts of plastic that have broken down over decades and ended up in fresh water supplies, the ground, snow, um, literally everywhere in the food chain, and therefore we're ingesting them as humans. They found them in newborn babies. It's kind of alarming, kind of worrying, and we don't really know how to solve the problem. Otherwise, we'd have to kind of just eliminate the use of plastic altogether, which is what people are asking. But that aside, um, it's quite a complex brief, and I've given you a complex brief on purpose because I want to challenge you. I want to give you something that normally you probably wouldn't pick because, again, that's the harsh reality of being an illustrator. These are the types of things people are talking about. These are the things where creativity shines, where you can actually let people into a serious problem that people need to know about in a really interesting, visually engaging way to get people talking about it, to start that conversation. Illustration's the perfect tool to do that. And while the ideas is the focus here today, and I'm not going to ask you to illustrate it in any way, shape, or form in the sense that you might expect it to, you can always take this idea yourself and kind of do it in your own time and add it to a university portfolio if you're going to apply for a course. This is the type of thing they'd absolutely love to see that you can actually take real world themes and respond to them in your way. It's perfect practice for what you'll actually do on a degree. So I know Gavin and the team have kind of got a PDF of this at their side that I've kind of sent them their way. So Gavin, I don't know whether it's worth uploading that to the chat maybe so people have got access to it. I don't know.
Of
But
course.
I'll talk you through the brief and kind of what I'm asking you to do, but there'll be kind of two tasks broke down. And I will get to talking about that right now. So, the magazine cover will look like something on screen. So, these blue bars essentially are like non-safe zones. So, the core of your idea should be kind of in this bottom quadrant, just so that you've got to imagine kind of like headlines and things would be in the blue areas. Um, does that make sense?
So I think at the moment there might be a little bit of confusion. There's some people are on board with it. So what's the first? This is leading up to the first task that they're doing, isn't
Yes.
it?
So task one. So what I'd like you to do first is, so going back to my version of the brief here, I would like you to start by doing this list exercise here. So, taking the headline that I've given you, which is this facing up to microplastics, doesn't have to be 2 words, it can be 5 words if needs be, but just start making those lists that I showed you on screen, and you all kind of said that makes a lot of sense. Um, with this brief now that I'm giving you, picturing that you're the illustrator being asked to do something, and it's a really great starting point to kind of break down those barriers. So if you're feeling confused or if you're feeling like this is way too much and I'm in too deep, pause the thought, take a step back a bit, because we all get like that, like professionals, trust and believe me. There's some briefs I get given and I just don't know what the hell they're talking about. And this exercise really helps ground my thinking and ground my ability and what I believe I can do. So, um, how long do you want to do this for, Gavin? Maybe 20 minutes, 10 minutes?
Is this for
It'll lead on to the kind of thumbnail exercise. So,
just getting the quick thoughts? Just I'm
yeah.
just concerned about time, so I'd say 5 minutes to get
Okay.
those
Yeah,
lists
yeah.
out.
Cool. Um, so if you want to just spend the next 5 minutes making those lists that I shared, um, does that make sense to everyone? Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? So, for example, you could think about microplastics, or you could take something from kind of the supplementary info and think about the environment. Oh, sorry. Um, and health, the human body. A red flag. What does that look like visually? A danger, warning. These are all words that you can start to brainstorm and think about what do they look like visually. And forgetting about like the complexity of the brief for a moment, just simply listing those objects and listing what they look like visually.
Just had a quick question about uploading results on the Padlet. I think for this one, are they just making the notes themselves and brainstorming themselves, and we'll leave the Padlet uploading to the other tasks that we're going to be doing?
Yeah, keep the Padlet to the thumbnails and the final ideas just so that it's like easy for everyone to understand like where the thinking's come from. But if you want to, I don't know, paste it into the chat maybe to help other people, that might be an idea. But this is your interpretation as well, I guess. So like try and keep it where it's just the idea of grounding your own thinking rather than trying to influence anybody else. It's in no way a competition, but I think it is quite interesting just to make sure that people aren't influenced by other people too.
And if you've got a moment, Ollie, do you mind just going back to that photo
Yeah,
of your list for
sure.
the sleep and
Can do that. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. That one.
circadian rhythm? That was the word I was trying to remember.
Yeah, it's the one that I very conveniently forgot after doing this. Yeah, so just right now for the next 5 minutes, just start creating these little lists of words. There doesn't need to be kind of two as a max. It can be as many words as you want that feel relevant to this brief. And just start making a non-exhaustive, should I say, list of like anything you can think of to do with that word. At this point, anything goes. You need material in order to work with it, basically. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Fab. I'll give you 5 minutes.
So yeah, just again, so for this brainstorming stuff, if you keep it to yourselves, feel free to put it into the Zoom chat, but don't worry about Padlet for now.
To be clear, though, you aren't doing this BHF brief. You're doing the facing up to microplastics. That's your version of getting to the heart of the body clock. Does that make sense? The only reason why I put this on screen is because other people were asking to see the list, so I don't want to confuse you. Would you like to see the brief now, or do you want to keep this on screen?
I think it might be good to get the brief back on.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, so I don't want it to confuse
Yeah.
people. There we go. So if you just kind of write this phrase in the middle of whatever you're working on, that might be a good point of reference for you.
We've got about 3 minutes left for this quick
Cool.
note-taking task. But while they're cracking on with that, I have a bit of a personal question. What has been the most difficult, complicated brief you've been given?
The one I won a World Illustration Award for, the Lancet series, no questions asked. It was uh, so you got a picture that I won a pitch to do a contract for 12 months. So it was like relentless. It was like 2 week briefing, 2 week job, 2 week briefing, 2 week job, 2 week briefing, 2 week job for 12 months straight with no breaks. And it was on everything from cancer, death, diabetes, menopause. I'm a man. That puts me in a very weird scenario that I didn't feel incredibly comfortable in. Um, there's again, it's just the reality as being an illustrator. Sometimes you are put in really uncomfortable situations that naturally pull you outside of your comfort zone, but you grow from it as well. And I won an award for that series. So um, I think it's one that I'll always remember because obviously I won an award for it, but also because it was so challenging and because it pushed me so hard and it was so kind of like at the time I was doing it, I didn't feel ready for it, and I don't think I would if I did it right now, to be honest. I'm proud of it. It's a series I'm really proud of for multiple different reasons, but yes, in answer to your question, that is absolutely the hardest brief I've ever been given.
Well, well done for getting the award for that as well.
Yeah.
Nice to see in the chat. We've got some little bits from facing up to microplastic, so bottles, food pollution, ocean pollution, the human body. So some nice little thought
Yeah, they're all very
processes there.
relevant thoughts. Let
Okay,
me
we've
know
got
when you want to move on and I'll move
got
on.
a final minute. Just whatever your brain produces, just get it all down.
They can, Lily May. You are very right there. It's quite disturbing. Probably got millions of them floating around in all of us.
Sometimes feels like that. Okay, that is time up on just getting down. It doesn't matter if you've got huge list, small list, you'll have little ideas down. That's all that matters. I'll let you crack on to the next part.
Cool. Ready to move on?
Yeah.
Great. So, as I mentioned, when you're thinking now about how to visualize these things and what they look like in terms of an idea, um, try and keep the kind of focus of the idea visually, i.e., where the most stuff is here, because if this were a real live job, the top and bottom, well, not really the bottom, but mostly the top would be taken up by words, headlines, and things that need to be clear and readable. So again, just to kind of insight and realities of the job, I wanted to include that just so you didn't have a complete free for all because you wouldn't have a complete free for all in the real world. So you've just done mini task one, but this is actually task one. So you've put in the chat, I believe, and it's also on the Padlet board as well that you can download. So this is like a framework that I'd like you to kind of put your thumbnail ideas in. And the goal here is to just fill this sheet, if possible, with thoughts, visual thoughts, not words. So rather like you saw when I showed you my version, which I'll just quickly flick back to. So this here based on this list of words that I made when I spoke about moon and bed and pace and cycles and all of the things that kind of make sense based on the brief I was given, how I translated that into kind of very, very rough sketches to kind of communicate these ideas I was thinking about. That's now your task. So I want you to take those words that you've just kind of thought about and in any material, whether it be you print it out and do it with a pencil and sketch, whether you've got a digital tablet and you put it on that, any way that you can start to very loosely sketch out these thumbnail ideas. But we want as many as possible. So even if you want to print this out multiple times and fill three of them, be my guest. At this stage, we just want as many ideas as your brain can think of. But you ultimately need to have a message in mind that you want to say. So Yes. So I want you to draw in these boxes. Imagine this is the magazine cover. So each one would be like a separate idea. And I want you to try and think about what it is you're actually saying with each idea you're thinking about. So, is the idea weighted towards kind of the health aspect of this and the danger, or is it about the science aspect of this and the breaking down of a piece of plastic? There are two examples. There's many, many more, but you can kind of have very different angles on the same brief. Does that make sense? It's not supposed to be easy, so I'm not asking you, do you think you can do it? Because I'm arguing that most of you will probably find this quite difficult. That's kind of the point. So, does the task make sense in terms of what I'm asking you to do? Great, amazing. So, I think we said about 20 minutes for this, Gavin, did we?
Probably going to have to squeeze it to 15 if that's going to be okay.
Yeah,
Just
that's
so then they
fine.
can have the time to do the final concept as well.
Yeah, cool. So, you'll have about 15 minutes now. I want you to fill as many of these boxes as possible with ideas, but it's one per box. So, this box is a magazine cover, if you want to think about it like that, and what would each one look like as a different iteration of it. So you're not colouring it in. If colour helps you think, that's fine, but the goal is not to create an illustration. In each box, you're thinking about a concept, an idea, a thumbnail, a sketch. That's the goal, and it's definitely not about perfection or things looking beautiful. This will probably be the ugliest thing you've made in your life, I assume. But it's about processing your thoughts visually and how they look. It's a fundamental part of working as a professional illustrator, and hence why I'm showing you how to do it.
So just to clarify with that as well, if you're working digitally and you're using digital drawing tools, then you can just simply download this template and work from that. If you're working with pencil, paper, then just quickly draw out some of these thumbnail boxes and there's just work in that. Because like Ollie says, it's all about just getting those ideas down, get those visual ideas down. So we'll go for 15 minutes. If you do need any help from myself, Eddie, Ollie, then do let us know in the chats. Already seeing some stuff on the Padlet board, which is cool. Obviously, feel free to put stuff in the Padlet. That's absolutely a-okay. We love seeing your work, seeing your processes.
Yeah, if something doesn't make sense or you need some clarity on anything, I'm here. That's why I'm here. So please do ask me and I'll do my best to help. But I think a lot of it is like working out how you do this as well. So I'm teaching you a basic framework essentially of how to do it. But if something doesn't feel quite right and you prefer to do it in your own way, like Gavin said, you could print this out and do it with pencils if needs be. That wouldn't personally be how I choose to do it. But if that works for you, great. Do it in your way as long as you're doing essentially the basics of what I'm asking you to do, which is translating those initial brainstorms of words and objects and things that you've thought about and how they look in a visual and start to identify, I guess, kind of hidden connections that when you make these lists, you can identify similarities between lists and then think, oh, what would they look like if they were together? Um, Someone's saying that nothing's working, Gavin. I'm not quite sure what they're referring to,
Don't
but
worry, I'll get on that for you. Don't worry. So, as people are cracking on, we've already had some questions come in for you, Ollie. So, may as well.
Brace myself.
Yes,
Question
I'm on
time.
now. It's question time. So a lot of people, well, there's a few people I noted about when you were showing your previous examples, in your particularly in your recent work that you've been doing, there's a lot of
Mhm.
eye imagery. Is that because it's more about the prompts that you're getting, or is there some kind of personal connection with like
Um,
eyes?
that's a very good question and something I did notice recently. I don't know. I've always been drawn to like putting the human in the work, but not drawing people. You'll notice that I don't often very draw a figure of a person because I just find it quite boring, to be totally honest. So, like silhouettes and profiles and hands are a big thing in my work, but I think it's my way of kind of getting the human angle in it, but uh, I guess like my way of doing that rather than like the way that I see the world, which is like boring. Like I'd rather like visualize it in a different way, I guess. But you're not wrong, and it's something that I did uh see myself, ironically. Um, so yeah, it's something that I'm trying to like when my brain goes in that direction, I'm like, nope, we've done that 3,000 times. Let's go into a different direction, which is, kind of what I'm asking you to do here. But yeah,
Now, this next question, I'm not surprised it's appeared. This could take up the final 10 minutes of this task. How do we combat the use of AI in workspaces? It feels like a lot of people don't want designers anymore because of AI taking over. And because I know you personally, Ollie, I know you have lots of thoughts
I
about
do,
AI.
and I'm aware that this is not a session on AI, so I will keep it brief. But um, at the end of the day, AI is a machine. So taking all the ethical concerns away from it, which everyone in the creative industry is kind of just appalled by in the first place, it isn't you. It doesn't have your voice. And like I've said with illustration, illustration is very much about identity, strategy. These are really key words that if you look at any successful illustrator, whether it be me or anybody else, we all have an aspect of this in what we do. And I think um, when you're competing now against something like automation and AI, which unfortunately does exist, it's a thing that people can just like, go onto ChatGPT and generate an image. Ethically, they shouldn't be doing that, but it's possible. Um, there's a whole kind of fanfare around copyright and clients don't use AI for the reason that it can't be copyrighted, but that's not necessarily how it's going to like play out forever. So I don't think necessarily like I've never had experience of AI taking my job, for example, but yes, Miranda, I've seen them too, and I think it's very much to do with like a territory thing as well. So like I know the UK government have been like heavily backlashed because they wanted to um amend the current UK copyright law, which is basically anyone who makes something, whether it be a piece of literature, a piece of artwork, illustration, music, whatever. If you're the creator, you own it by law, and no one's allowed to use it unless it's fair use. Fair use is usually defined by like in an education context or research context or something that doesn't profit from it. Um, but the kind of Silicon Valley tech companies are lobbying the UK government to change that copyright law to be inclusive of AI training is also fair use, which is insane. It's not because it all it does is ultimately take away our jobs and line their pockets with even more cash. So it absolutely boils my blood. And there's been lots and lots of, I don't know whether any of you saw it, but there's been lots of campaigning from like the Association of Illustrators, the Association of Photographers, even massive newspapers. Like there was a time where all British newspapers showcased the same cover, and it was Make It Fair with the AI in Fair highlighted, which is like a whole kind of national campaign. That has never happened. That has never ever happened in the history of UK media, where all 10 or whatever there is newspapers across all political spectrums have agreed to print the same cover. So it just shows you kind of like how much of an issue it is and just an ongoing conversation. But to circle back to the original point, I think all you can do as a individual is prove your value. If you prove your value and you prove your value to a client of what it is you're bringing to the conversation that is above your materials you're using, you can really solidify your place in industry as someone as the go-to for that particular thing or for that particular type of brief. Like that's why I decided to kind of niche with science, health, and tech because I'm a bionic man. It makes complete sense, you know. And I think it doesn't need to be that deep as like I've done it, but if you find an aspect of yourself to infuse into your work, it's more than the work in that sense. Then it actually then becomes like a tool that you can sell. Um, does that make sense? I realize that was a very deep chat, but
I mean, with anything AI, you can have a whole
yeah, it's a
session
whole thing.
just around that.
It's literally a whole thing, and there isn't an. I wish there was, but there isn't a simple solution to it either. It's very much um, because there's a lot of ethical questions concerned in it, with kind of like the copyright aspect, and also the fact that like AI is being trained using people's work that is copyright protected, and therefore they haven't been permission to it, and they're not being compensated if it's used. There's a whole kettle of fish that like the cat's out of the bag essentially, and you can't stop it. But um, I'm hopeful that in time we can regulate it. I think that's what's going to actually bring benefit from it to the people who can actually use it in ways. And like you've seen in the briefs that I take on, it isn't all like doom and gloom with AI. I think we kind of bucket AI as like this buzzword, but it's generative AI that we have a problem with. Machine learning and the way that AIs actually work is helping find cures for cancer, HIV, real problems that we're actually like need solutions to because we don't have the answers to, and AI can help us look for those answers. So I'm fundamentally against AI in visual communication because I just think it takes away the point of why we're communicating things visually in the first place because we're human beings. But I do see its relevance and use in like the scientific fields, the medical fields, where it's actually solving problems. I think that's the key. If it's solving problems that big tech have made up that are trying to sell us as actual problems when they're not, like speeding up your workflow in Photoshop by removing a background, that is kind of maybe useful to certain people, but I would argue it's not as useful as like trying to find a cure for cancer. So yeah, I'll park it there because I'm going to talk forever. But
And just to say, so we've got 5 minutes left for this particular task, but already on the Padlet board, there's so many cool things on there.
yeah, I'm going to take a look now.
Um,
Um,
some
look,
really great ideas. And what's nice is that it's a real range of ideas. Like everybody's tackled this from so many different perspectives.
oh yeah, nice. I'm seeing the stomach coming up quite a lot as like a silhouette shape, which is quite interesting. I like that idea from Iris as well with the turtle and like the hexagonal of the shapes on its shell then breaking down. That's quite an interesting, like you're not showing plastic, but you infer that it's plastic from the breaking down aspect.
So I do have for the final 4 minutes, I've got one more quick question for you, and
Go on.
then we'll have a quick look and see what people have done. Um, well, this one, I think this is a great question, actually. Do you consider market research when creating illustrations?
By market research, what do you mean? Would be my kind of question to that.
I assume that would be whether it's thinking about trends, what people are interested in, or whether it's for particular demographics.
So that will quite often come from the client in terms of like not necessarily trends, but in my land of like sciencey healthy stuff, they'll like tell me who the brief or who the audience is, and then I'll have that in mind when I'm concepting and things. But ultimately, like I say, it's the client's job and the client's problem I'm solving. So the job of an art director in a commercial sense is to direct my thinking and direct the ideas to be something which is relevant for the brief and their audience. I don't know that in the way that they know that. So, like I say, illustration is always a collaboration. It's always an element of meeting in the middle with your client in some way. And when you work with an art director, that is their role. They are the kind of, whether it's a brand guardian with something like the BHF work I showed you, that Marco, who I was working with, would be in charge of like, does this feel BHF enough? Or whether it's something like the Lancet journals, which are like scientific publication, they would have to make sure that the ideas that they ultimately landed on would be scientifically accurate because they're showing it to an audience which are incredibly qualified and incredibly knowledgeable. So it's not necessarily the job of an illustrator to kind of do loads of homework on that. But I think if you're someone who naturally enjoys reading and researching and like looking up things that are new information to you, then you'll very much enjoy being an editorial illustrator in particular because you'll quite often learn on the job, as I mentioned, for the reasons of just being able to do the job in the first place. It can be quite interesting, quite fascinating, but it also makes things quite challenging for the same reason. One thing I would say is that there's some of you who've just got one sketch at the moment. I would try and push yourself to have at least three, if possible, just because it'll make the next task I'm going to ask you to do a lot easier. Because you will need more than one idea to do it. So, uh, I know some of you said you're going to like layer them over and things, which is fine. That's perfect. But yeah, if you can fill as many of those basic squares that I shared a worksheet on, that would be ideal. How are we doing for time, Gavin? How much longer have they got?
We've got a final minute.
Cool. But this is really good in terms of like I'm very pleased that no one's kind of like gone really finessed and like embraced the ugliness of what I'm asking you to do because it ultimately may never be something a client sees. It's for you. It's to just get your thoughts on paper and work through them. Which is great. That's all you ever need to do.
Got a couple of people asking about explanations beside their work is absolutely fine, which I would say yes, that's fine.
Yeah,
Just give a little
yeah, that's
comment. Just
great. Absolutely.
oh, that is the time on that task.
Cool. Just getting back to the presentation, 1 second. Right, so are we moving on?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. Right. So you have all now got some basic thumbnails, I guess you'd describe them as. And now what I'm going to ask you to do is, sorry, I should have put that on screen when you were doing it for something nicer to look at. So now I'm going to ask you to do a second task, which is to pick, depending on how many you've done, 2 to 4 ideas which you think are working really well or have got potential. And from that, create one final concept that you've landed on that would essentially become a magazine cover if you were to illustrate it. So if I just take you quickly back to my example from here, so I would effectively have picked those 4 sketches. You don't need to flesh them out in terms of like how I've done here, but just choosing them with this kind of like, yeah, this works, this doesn't. And then if you go to this slide here, I made this into like a final idea. So this is the task two effectively. I want you to pick one of your thumbnails that's working and think about the next stage of the idea. So is it about the maybe the lighting in the idea, or is it about something that is kind of not as finessed as it could be, and you can kind of make the idea clearer in just like focusing on this one uh idea now, one concept. But when you're thinking about, I guess, like which one's best, it's not about the feel, it's not about the look of it. It's about the which one is the most impactful, which one is the most relevant to what you're talking about. So, sorry, I'm going backwards again. So if I go back to the task, so first task, it's like 2 tasks really, this, but it'll make sense. So I want you to kind of create essentially like a short list from the concepts that you've got here. And I want you to flash out one, Marianne, just one. And when I say flesh out, I really don't want you to go to town on color and everything because that's after this point. But this is an ideas workshop, so I just want you to land on one final concept that you can essentially, in your own time, if needs be, take forward to produce the magazine cover. Um, does that make sense? Yeah, Gabrielle, exactly that. So I just want you to choose the best thumbnail out of the ideas that you've got and kind of make it clearer as to what you're actually trying to tell me. So when you're working with the thumbnail, it was quite small. You can use like a full sheet of A4 to do this and actually get a proper concept going with details and things if needs be. Obviously, we're limited on time today, so I appreciate that. But so that if I was your client, I fully understand what it is that you've chosen as the concept that will work up. Um, but like I say, I want you to consider, like I would as a professional illustrator, I want you to consider what type of people this is targeting. So, um, in reality, this is a membership publication, but I didn't put that in the brief because it just confuses matters. But if you think of it as something like a new scientist or a BBC Science Focus, something that's on like a newsstand that someone could walk into a supermarket and get from. So you're not talking to kind of like scientists or medical people, you're talking to your nan, your mum, your brother, people, normal people, and it's about communicating this really complex idea that essentially plastic lives in all of us and doing it in a really engaging, impactful way. It might be that one of your ideas feels more emotional and more human than others. It might be that one feels more scientific and more informative. It might be that one feels visually more like a punch and like this is going to grab your attention than others do. And all of that's valid. I just want you to land on one that is yeah, this is my final concept, and this is the one I've chosen from the result of my workshop today. Um, how long do you have? Ideally, it would have been about 20 minutes, but I think we're pushed on time now, are we, Gavin? What do you think?
Yeah, I did. It would 10 be okay
Yeah, I
just
mean,
to
you've got the
do their
basis
final
of the
concept.
actual thumbnail now, so I think it's just about finessing it to make it more of a final, this is my proposed idea. Does that make sense, everybody?
So yeah, 10 minutes. Oh, get my face back on. 10 minutes. And again, not a polished final concept, but you're taking either the best concept or the best ideas from several of your concepts and making it into, right, this is what I'm going to do forward into making this amazing, colorful final piece.
It's definitely still just a sketch. So it's not a fully fledged image in any way, shape, or form. It's just, even if it's just a line drawing, it's just to communicate to another person, this is my final idea. So it can still feel rough. It can still feel, if I go back to my images that I landed on, obviously I've got skill and experience on my side. So obviously it's not going to feel maybe, it'll feel more finesse maybe than what yours will feel like. But you can ultimately tell what I'm going to do here if you're a client. It's in no way beautiful and no way pretty, but it gives you a very clear indication of what the final artwork would then look like. Does that make sense? It's almost like a blueprint, I guess, of what the final image is going to be. So yeah, if you've got just under 10 minutes just to kind of do what you can with one final idea, but even just that process of working out, well, what is my best idea? That is essentially what you're going to take away from this workshop. That's the key skill I want you to kind of latch onto is that analysis of your own work and actually understanding that some ideas might look great and might fit the space really well, but are they actually communicating the idea of the brief in the best way possible, or in the most interesting way possible? And ultimately, that's what makes really great illustration, really great work, and what you'll see on the shelves in shops and things. That's what art directors need and look for.
Once again, whilst people are getting on with the task, got a couple other questions as well. And if you are, whilst you are doing the task, if you do have any burning questions for Ollie, because it was probably going to be a very limited Q&A session at the end. Do pop your questions in the chat. Um, but got a question here. To what extent do you get to choose which briefs you complete and for which companies and businesses?
So it's always like a proposal essentially. So a client will approach me and say, "Are you available? Are you interested?" And it's not a committal like I've asked you for a service, so you now need to say yes. I might be busy. I've had people approach me to do things that just ethically just don't align with me as a person or something I'm not comfortable associating myself with. And I won't go into the details of what they are here because it's kind of irrelevant. But in answer to that question, no, it's not like a complete free for all because ultimately, like you do need to um have a point of view which helps you have a filter on these types of briefs. And I am someone who believes like having a filter only works in your benefit because it makes people understand what types of briefs you respond to and what you want to work on. Ultimately, your work is an extension of you. So, um, but like I say, I have an agent. They help in the marketing and self promotion side of things. Even people who don't have an agent still have to like spend like 60+% of their time that they exist as a professional marketing themselves. It's dog eat dog out there and it's tough and you've got to tell people what you do, otherwise they don't know you exist. And to tell the right people what you do, I think that's the key. But um yeah, it's like any freelance business. You've got to market yourself. You've got to make people aware of what you do and in the right places to get these opportunities in the first place. Does that make sense?
Well, um, just for everybody doing the task, you got about 5 minutes left. See what we can do with this final concept. Got some more questions. Well, actually, this one is not to be that person that goes more of a comment rather than a question. But I just wanted to flag this. It's a really nice comment earlier when looking through kind of early works and a comment saying, I love artwork like this. As a disabled person, art is one way that I can express how that particular experience feels. And I feel like because that's what you're doing a lot, particularly being like a
Yeah, absolutely.
pacemaker, patient.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, illustration is a communication tool. Straight up. There's no getting around that. And I think the beauty of it is that whereas with design, there's very much like rules you have to follow, or people like to break them and kind of break the mold, but there generally is like rules you're taught about. It's all about structure and spacing and things like being aligned in certain ways and like typography that goes in and out of fashion and illustration kind of breaks the mold and all of that. It's very much like if you join the crowd and do what everyone else is doing in illustration, you will not be successful because you just look like you don't have a voice. You don't know who you are, and then the client doesn't know where or when to use you. So, um, I think I'm a great example of this, but having that adversity that you've not chose, that you've just been given it in life can sometimes be your greatest selling point as well. Not to commercialize yourself hugely, but it can be a really good unique point of view that, like I say, if you've got something that somebody else doesn't have in illustration in this industry, it's the best thing you can offer because it's ultimately going to be that card essentially that you can play where it's like, well, if you're a let's say a brand wanting to raise awareness for Pride Month, for example, which celebrates everyone from all walks of life everywhere, not just sexuality, from just people living their authentic selves. Of course, you want people who have disabilities and things involved in those kinds of campaigns. And again, if you don't tell people that you've got those things as part of just who you are, I think it's really important that people understand that illustrators work as an extension of themselves, as I explained. So it's just a really nice way to kind of not only for like you to process it yourself and understand how to use it positively rather than like fighting it all the time, but also to kind of make the world see you how you want to be seen. It's a really great way of doing that as well.
So there's about probably just under 3 minutes left. So we'll do This final question I've got. I get this question asked a lot, and certainly we as a university do. Do you think doing an illustration degree or any type of creative degree is actually helpful in becoming an illustrator or an artist in the real world?
That's a very loaded question. I think it's also down to the individual. So like I'm very much someone who thinks like you get out of something what you put in. So if you come to a degree thinking that it's going to be like 3 years holiday essentially, or like 3 years to just kind of like do what you're doing now, but just for 3 years, that is not the right way to approach it. Because my illustration degree basically year one was completely smashing to pieces what my perception of drawing even meant, and drawing with weird machines, tools. I drew something with grease from a Greg sausage roll, for example. There's a kind of like an experimental phase to like getting everyone on the same playing field so that it's not just like everyone's drawing in fine art style, painting and pencils, which most people have when they come to an illustration degree. Um, and then, like I said, it kind of like branches out into fact and fiction. Then you pick one, then you specialize. Um, but I would argue the key skill you learn on any creative degree, really, but especially in illustration, is the idea of this ideas. So you will not pass an illustration degree if you're just saying, I want to do this, here it is, next brief. That isn't the real world. So what your degree is really good at is um, it doesn't necessarily like give you the commercial experience because I don't think anyone can get that unless you try and go out and get it for yourself. But what it does is it gives you that experience in the framework of how to build ideas and how to pick ideas, which is essentially what we're doing right now. But so yeah, I think it's helpful, but only if you understand what skills it's actually teaching you. Because if you don't understand that, that's kind of you've fallen at the first hurdle, if that makes any sense.
And just to add on to that quickly before we start wrapping up. Um, Like I think there is no right or wrong pathway. There is absolutely a pathway where you don't do a degree, you're kind of doing things your own way, going into industry from there. But I do think
Yeah.
there are particular benefits of a degree of
Mm.
whether, obviously depending on that university, on that degree and what it's doing, it's preparing you with tools that you might not get elsewhere. Just being in that creative environment of working with other creatives or working, depending on the lecturers, have they got that industry experience that's actually going to help you
Yeah.
to actually get that real world sense, like Ollie's been talking about a lot. Um, so it's really about checking out, like going to those open days, checking out that degree, like really looking into what you're going to be doing on the course and whether is that going to give you the tools that you need to do the creative things that you want to do and go from there. Is it going to have all the technical spaces and equipment to give you the things that you need to do the things that you want to do? Um, so that is time on doing a task. So we're
Cool.
probably ultimately going to run over about 5, 10 minutes once we go through wrapping things up. But do we want to, Ollie, are you able to get the Padlet board up on your screen
I'm
so we can all take a look?
just looking at it now. Give me a minute. How do I need to stop sharing and then share somewhere else, or can I just share somewhere else?
You should be able to just share something else. It
Ah,
depends on
yeah,
how you've set it up.
yeah, got it here. So in this,
Hey. So it will be from the bottom would be the latest stuff.
yeah,
And then towards the top, you'll find all the thumbnails and ideas.
yeah. Well, I was looking at it from about maybe this point here when I was on the presentation, so I haven't seen anything from kind of like this point here now. But I think you've all done really well. This is not easy. Like I said, I'm not expecting anyone to find this a breeze. It's not easy at all. Um, this is really interesting. I like this. Because like I say, it's like a play of two images in one. 'Cause you've got like the warning sign and then the plastic bottle. Um, it's nice to see kind of like the human aspects coming through as well with like eyes, as you know, I'm a fan of. Lungs, then also face and hands. So Really good job. Really good job. That's interesting as well with this kind of plastic bag as the earth. How did you all find this? Just out of curiosity, did you find it really hard? Did you find it harder than you were expecting? Is it completely different to what you were expecting? Um, I would suspect so, but really fun. That's good. I wasn't expecting anyone to find it fun, to be honest, but that's great that you did. I'm very glad. It's really nice to see like the progression of ideas too. I don't know whether this will go full screen, will it? But that's really lovely where it's like
Mm.
gestural almost.
I agree with Gabrielle saying it's hard at the start, but then once the creative
Yeah.
juices start
Yeah,
flowing, you
yeah,
get that snowball
absolutely.
effect. You're like, oh right, yeah, you get all these different ideas coming out.
One thing I will underline though is that this is only just one type of illustration. So, yes, I'm a professional, yes, I'm experienced, but I do a specific type of illustration, not just in the science world, but editorially. So, editorial briefs are naturally quite uh, challenging, conceptual. Like, it's just what it is. If you work in maybe publishing or not just for children, but for adults too, or even some commercial lanes like advertising work, it quite often lends itself to people, place, location, positive vibes, which editorial doesn't often. So I think it's just important to be aware that I'm a type of illustrator doing certain things in editorial slash commercial, but there's other people who you might speak to who work in a completely different way to me, and they're still very much valid. They're not an illustrator. Um, I just want to make that really clear because I know there's people saying like this is really hard and I don't like illustration because of it, but you may prefer other types of illustration, is what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
That's great. Thank you. And thank you for everybody um, for sharing their work on the Padlet board. Did you have a few more slides, Ollie, to wrap up on the session?
Yes, I do. Give me a minute to bring them back. Are we back? Cool. So, very quickly, what did I do? As I mentioned, this was a real brief that I did earlier this year in May, I think, for a June issue. So this is my final idea that I pitched. So it was very much about kind of like the connection between plastic and the sea, which some of you also identified, which is great. I think if you were to survey like people on the street and ask them about microplastics, a lot of people would have said the ocean. It's quite an obvious connection, but it's a really important one we need to underline. And it was quite a simple image of kind of creating this kind of face portrait out of a shoreline and just the breakdown of plastic that builds it. So it's like this colliding of natural and synthetic, which informed the colors that I used too. So this was my final result and the actual cover and what it ended up looking like. Um, so yeah, you've just essentially done exactly what I did for a real job. And I also did not find this brief easy. But I really like the end result. I think it's really good. So, just want to finish up this session by saying I'm here to help. So a lot of you kind of want to, or if you want to go in this field, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very active in kind of the emerging talent and mentoring space in the UK in particular, but also kind of worldwide. I'm currently mentoring someone in Armenia and Lithuania via the Association of Illustrators mentoring program. So that's something I'm always involved with and something I'm really keen to continue. Um, I promise this is not a humble brag, but it's useful, I promise. So these are the main social platforms that I'm active on. And if you want to go and follow me over there, I have some good resources on this story highlight here, Ask Ollie, where it's kind of like a Q&A for starting out in industry, what you need to consider, what you need to do. Definitely check that out because it's got a lot of useful tips in there that saves me repeating myself all the time. Um, and I'm also on LinkedIn quite frequently, kind of sharing resources, sharing tips, articles, kind of posing questions to the industry to get responses and things. So useful resources for you there. And I also just wanted to mention an initiative that I co-founded with a fellow professional, Chiara Vachesi, who is a very, very experienced more than me illustrator in Amsterdam, working in the science, health, and tech space too. And we co-founded Illuminate, which is an online community to kind of give people this broad sense of where illustrators can contribute to that conversation within science, health, and tech. And it's what we do. So we've invited uh, fellow professionals. As you can see here on the left, you may not recognize some names if you're already looking in the illustration industry, to some new talent, which is here on the right. And we've also had really big agencies, Scientific American, The Lancet, as I've mentioned. And in 2 days' time on Friday, we're actually doing a session on agents here, which is kind of uh, a discussion, an open panel discussion about kind of like how you find an agent, when you need an agent, what an agent even does. And we're looking forward to it. So just wanted to mention that in case anybody wants to be a part of that. We do have a Discord channel, which I can fire the link across to Gavin and those guys to distribute if needs be. Anyone's welcome to join. But yeah, if you want to kind of follow myself on social media, you'll see updates on this as and when they appear. And with that, I would just like to say thank you very much. And I hope you've enjoyed kind of getting a taster of something which is not something I assume you've done prior to this, but trust and believe me when I say that it will be a very useful skill for you to have in your back pocket as any type of illustration, whether it be for editorial, publishing, commercial, advertising, event, whatever you want to call it. Everything requires ideas. So ideas are a fundamental part of any professional illustration avenue you decide to pursue. And hopefully today gave you a taster of that. So
Thank
yeah,
you so
go.
much, Ollie. It's been a really great session. Lots of thank yous in the chat. So before we finish up today, we'd love to get your feedback on the workshops. So for those who've been in the other summer school workshops, you'll be used to this by now, I'm sure, but I'm just about to launch a poll that should appear in front of your faces. So if
Cool.
you don't mind filling that out for the session, that would be amazing so we can make these bigger and better going forward. Um, and there also, since you signed up for this, there will be an end of series feedback form. So you should be getting an email with that. And if you do fill out that particular form, then you could be in the chance of winning a £75 voucher. We'll be selecting a winner at random from that. You can check out the terms and conditions on the Summer School events page. So that actually wraps up our entire summer school series. So whether this has been your first or your sixth workshop for this year's edition, thank you so much for joining through. You'll be able to access all of our workshops through recordings and worksheets if you've missed any of the live sessions. So if you've signed up for previous workshops, you'll receive an email with the link for that. But if you haven't got those, or you didn't initially sign up for a previous workshop, send us an email. We'll send everything over to you. We're also offering the opportunity to receive a Summer School 2025 certificate. I know I've been getting a lot of questions around a certificate. So, just as a reminder, to get a hold of a certificate, you need to submit outcomes from at least 3 summer school workshops. So whether that's something you've done during that workshop or like today, if you've got your final concept, you take the time, you develop it into a full final piece, then you can submit that as an outcome. So if you send off your work to student.recruitment@norwichuni.ac.uk, Eddie will put the email in the chat for you. But please be aware any work submitted to us for that summer school certificate might be used for promotional information for next year's edition because all your work is absolutely brilliant. So once again, submit 3 outcomes by email to student.recruitment@norwichuni.ac.uk. We love to see what you're making throughout the summer school series. So you can tag us on Instagram Or you can send over bits that you want us to highlight on socials. So you can either tag us in at Norwich Uni underscore outreach. Again, Eddie will put that in the chat for you, or you can email us stuff as well. So that is it for summer schools, but we have online workshops and competitions throughout the entire year. So coming up next is Curiosity. So this is a program that myself and you may know Jason Waters from before. Um, so we'll be starting that in October, and it's very similar to summer school. We're doing five different online workshops that do cover different subject areas. So we're doing workshops on fine art, character design, graphic communication, film and photography, and fashion and textiles. But it's all through the lens of queerness and identity. And then we're going to be spending time developing a final piece that we'll be showcasing in an online exhibition. Ran it last year, was absolutely amazing. So we're running it once again, but this time we're opening up to 14 plus. Last year was only for 16 and above, but now we're opening up to 14 plus. So if you're interested in Curiosity, once again, Eddie will put the link in the chat for you. And there'll be all sorts of things throughout the entire year as well. So keep an eye out on events. So that's kind of everything from us. Um, just checking the chat, making sure if the links, I'm just going to pop in the links once again. Not sure I've seen them uh, around. So here is the email address for submitting any of the pieces for the certificates. Here is the link for the Curiosity. And here is the Instagram handle if you needed that. So thank you for joining in. Hopefully you've enjoyed today and the entire summer school series. And take care, and hopefully we'll see you soon at our next events. And thank you again, Ollie.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.